It was long awaited and short-lived. For the first time in 3 years, Russia and Ukraine held direct peace talks. But the meeting in Istanbul ended after less than 2 hours with no major breakthrough. A prisoner swap was agreed. But when it came to the conditions for a ceasefire, Moscow had demands that Kyiv slammed as unacceptable. European leaders meeting in Albania condemned Russia's behavior and signaled fresh sanctions targeting energy, shipping and banks. EU chief Ursula von der Leyen said pressure on Putin has to increase until he is ready for peace. I'm Nicole Fröhlich in Berlin, and this is The Day.
And our efforts have shown a very, very small diplomatic success.
We had a real chance to take important steps toward ending this war.
The world saw who was really willing to sit at a negotiation table.
If only Putin had not been afraid to come to Turkey.
And who was not.
Because if Russia won't come to the negotiating table, Putin must pay the price.
Welcome to The Day. Russia and Ukraine held peace talks in Istanbul today. It was the first direct meeting in more than 3 years. The talks ended after less than 2 hours with no deal. Ukraine says Russia made new demands, including a military pullback from key regions, conditions which Kyiv says are unacceptable. But both sides did agree to a major prisoner swap, 1,000 detainees each. And the two sides agreed, in principle, to meet again. Russian President Vladimir Putin did not travel to Turkey for the talks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called his absence a sign that Russia wasn't serious about ending the war. After holding talks in Ankara on Thursday, Zelensky met with European leaders and NATO leaders in Albania today. They're lining up behind Ukraine and warning Moscow that patience is running out.
The first direct talks between Russia and Ukraine since peace efforts collapsed in 2022. Turkey, which hosted the meeting, called it an important day for world peace. But talks were short, just under 2 hours, and there was no breakthrough on a ceasefire. But something did come out of it. Both sides agreed to a prisoner swap deal, 1,000 prisoners each. It would be the biggest such exchange since the full-out war began. Moscow said it was satisfied with progress made and was ready to keep talking to Kyiv. Ukraine wasn't quite as optimistic, especially given Putin's absence.
Our president was expecting the high-level discussions in here, and I think the next step would be that the leaders level meeting should be organized, and that would be our next step.
Despite the prisoner deal, both countries are still far apart on key conditions for ending the fighting, especially Ukraine's demand for an unconditional ceasefire, which is strongly backed by its European allies. Allies who were meeting in Albania said they were disappointed by the outcome.
The efforts we have made so far have failed due to Russia's unwillingness to take the first steps in the right direction. But we will not give up. We will continue, and we will coordinate well together with the Americans.
On the sidelines of the summit in Albania, Zelensky joined the leaders of France, Germany, Britain, and Poland for a call with Trump. They're hoping to present a unified front and to up the pressure and plan additional sanctions on Moscow should Russia continue to refuse to pause the fighting.
And I can now welcome Andrei Kozyrev. He was the foreign minister of Russia from 1990 until 1996 under Boris Yeltsin. Mr. Kozyrev, welcome to The Day. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, we just heard Keir Starmer promising a coordinated response by Ukraine's Western allies. What would compel Russia to, as the NATO Secretary General put it, to play ball?
Thank you for having me. the problem is that those vows to do something, even deadlines, even ultimatums, they are not nothing new. We hear it for years. And the leaders, European leaders, with all due respect, but they still speak of sanctions. You know what? The time for the attrition, war of attrition through sanctions passed 3 years ago. At the beginning, there was a possibility probably to stop Putin by sanctions. But now sanctions would not work. Take my word. I would be happy to be mistaken. But that's the situation. And you know why? Have you seen, or you might show again, the parade on the Red Square in Moscow? And who was sitting near Putin? Mr. Xi, the head of China, Chinese chairman. And China is behind, and it's supplying Putin with everything needed for the war of attrition. And China is no nonsense country. It's large country. It's second economy of the world, and they would do it for as long as it takes. So European and American partners, they lost time for economic sanction.
They lost time, and what
Putin
we're seeing now, I'm assuming you think it's too little, too late. Sorry to jump in there, but what kind of pressure would actually work on the Kremlin at this point?
It's a war, and the weapons are the instruments of wars, and it's not a rocket science, you know. And again, it's not my discovery. It's not discovery of America. It's just for centuries, if not for thousands of years, wars are fought with weapons. So only supplying Ukraine with weapons would take significant effect and could lead to defeat of Putin's aggression in Ukraine. But that requires very clear strategy. And Europe, at least Europe, should make it clear that they are speaking not on defeating Russia, but defeating Russian invasion forces in Ukraine, and that everything will stop after those forces cross back a Russian border, because Russia speculates, and unfortunately many other people, even in the United States, speculate that the problem is to defeat Putin, and Putin will answer with nuclear weapons. Yes, it's impossible to defeat Russia like the Third Reich or Hitler Germany was defeated, unfortunately, for many, because it's nuclear weapon state. But a defeat of the invasion force would not force and even would not stimulate Putin to use nuclear weapons, because it's too dangerous for him. So it should be very clear strategy.
Why then do you think Ukraine's allies are so hesitant to ramp up their military support so that Ukraine can really exert maximum pressure on Russia?
Yes, maximum pressure is on the side of Russia, but maximum pressure, Russian style and the war style are bombs, weapons. Again, that's what I am saying, that Putin uses bombs. He's not using anymore just empty threats or empty promises. He is not talking, but he is bombing.
Yeah.
So that's the situation, and response to him might be only through weapons.
You said wars are fought with weapons, but they're usually ended at the negotiating table. So what do you think Russia was actually trying to achieve by calling these ceasefire talks in Istanbul?
No, nothing. It's just fooling the Western side. It's theatrics, diplomatic theatrics. And Putin enjoys it. He enjoys bombing Ukraine, and he enjoys fooling Western leaders, because that's what he wants. He wants not only conquer Ukraine, but he wants to discredit strategically, historically, if you want, discredit the West, that the West is too weak to stand against him. And that's what won the Beijing, Chinese leaders, they support behind doors, probably mostly Putin, because they want to be sure that the West is too frail to respond, because that will untie their hands, so to say. They will feel free to to go to aggression in their part of the world, or if not much farther than that.
Yeah.
So
the West you talk about, does that include the United States? Because Vladimir Putin seems pretty keen on bringing him also into that fold of Xi himself and the U.S. and kind of divvying up the world into spheres of influence. So what message do you think Putin sent to Donald Trump by playing things the way he did?
He just tries to show him that he is the partner, equal partner for negotiations, but at the negotiating table, he will not commit himself. Even if he commits, he will just, deceive that he is ready to stop. He will not stop. He just wants to humiliate. In the end, it will be humiliation, like this episode, just recent episode in Istanbul. President Trump even hinted that he was ready to go there, but Putin did not. He just sent a ridiculous, a humiliating bunch of people, and that's part of his enjoyment. That's his second, or most probably first aim in this war in Ukraine. Ukraine is not even the first target. The first target is the West, including Great Britain and including European leaders, and he just enjoys discrediting them. That's what he's doing.
As Russia's former chief diplomat, how do you personally feel watching all of this unfold?
I am absolutely flabbergasted that in 3 years, the West could not understand what Putin's Russia is. When I grew up and I was a diplomat even in the Soviet Union, and at that time, the West and America knew quite well what was the Soviet Union, and especially President Reagan, when he said that it was an evil empire, and any president actually of the United States was absolutely clear-eyed on what the Soviet Union was. And it's amazing. It's kind of absolutely unbelievable that the West, after 3 years of the war, does not understand what is happening. What is happening is that there is an aggressive power, and you know what? These half measures, half steps, these empty threats with half sanctions, if indeed they wanted to impose very tough sanctions, that might be meaningful, but it's not substitute for the weapons. Yet, each time it's 17th package of sanctions, 17th package of sanctions, and not yet overwhelming sanctions, not yet ironclad sanctions. So that's ridiculous. And this is only training the beast, because Putin and Xi, the Chinese, they are learning how to circumvent those partial sanctions. They already, and then gain strength, also humiliating the West and, militarily, that they are building military economy, military industry, which Putin had not when he started the war.
Yeah.
But
we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time, unfortunately.
Training beast.
Thank you so much for your time. That was former Russian Foreign Minister Andrei Kozyrev. Pleasure speaking to you today.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
More from our correspondents in Kyiv and Riga, Rebecca Ritters and Sergei Satanovsky. Good to see you both. Now, I'll start with you, Rebecca. Expectations were pretty low going into this meeting. We heard about the prisoner swap. What other progress was made?
Yeah, you're right. The expectations, at least from the Ukrainian side, were incredibly low. And it seems that for the Ukrainian side, those low expectations were met. We had one source, Ukrainian source, telling the media that the Moscow's demands were non-starters and detached from reality. Now, one of the demands he may have been referring to there was a demand by Moscow that Ukraine withdraw many of its soldiers along great swathes of that front line, something that Ukraine would not be prepared to agree to, that they would see as akin to capitulation. We've seen President Zelensky come out kind of criticizing these talks, saying that Russians haven't moved an inch, that this is an empty process. But, as you mentioned there, you've got the prisoner swap, 1,000 on both sides. That's certainly a positive to come out of these talks, and I suppose really relatively unexpected positive to come out of these sides, but it is a long way from this 30-day ceasefire that was, hoped for, although, as we went into these talks, certainly not expected. Some other positives to come out were a potential meeting, or at least the discussion that next time we would be seeing potentially a meeting between the two leaders, and that there are potentially another date for new talks that will be announced soon.
Sergei, what is the Russian side saying?
The head of the Russian delegation, Vladimir Medinsky, said that Moscow was satisfied with the outcome of these talks, which, by the way, lasted less than 2 hours. He also confirmed that both sides had agreed on a prisoner exchange that Rebecca just mentioned, 1,000 for 1,000, which, if it happened, would be the largest since the beginning of the war in 2022. Medinsky also says that Ukraine and Russia have agreed on to exchange proposals on how a ceasefire might begin. So in other words, no agreement was reached today, but Russia at least claims to be open to continuing this dialogue.
Rebecca, after the meeting, Ukraine immediately proceeded to rally support from its Western allies. What does Zelensky expect from them to, in terms of support for a fruitful continuation of this process?
Well, Zelensky left Turkey. He went to Albania, where he's meeting with EU leaders. He's met with the leaders of Germany, France, Poland and Britain, the same four leaders that came to Kyiv last weekend and that put forward this ceasefire, this call for a ceasefire and peace negotiations. That he's been chatting with them. They, once again, as they did last weekend, apparently got on the phone with Donald Trump. Now, he's apparently agreed with Zelensky's view of the meeting that, that Putin is not necessarily taking this seriously. Zelensky is calling on the Europeans to implement a sanctions package, and that they've already put together a 17th sanctions package that Zelensky is now urging that they put forward. And the US also have a sanctions package that they're looking at also putting into place in trying to ramp up that pressure on Vladimir Putin. But as we've seen in the past, it doesn't very, very often doesn't have any effect.
Yeah. Sergei, the Ukrainian team say the next step would be a meeting between Zelensky and Putin. Any chance the Kremlin would be up for that?
Well, after the talks, Medinsky said in the Kremlin they took note, as he said, of Ukraine's interest in organizing such a meeting between Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. Of course, that doesn't mean that it would actually happen. For a long time, the Kremlin insisted that Zelensky was no longer a legitimate president and that there was no point in meeting with him. But after talks with the American side, that rhetoric has softened but just a bit. But if you look at what the Kremlin and the Russian state media are saying, what Putin really wants is a conversation not with Ukraine but with the US, where they can divide up spheres of influence around the world. Which is why it's hard to expect any major breakthroughs from future talks between Russia and Ukraine.
Sergei Satanovsky in Riga and Rebecca Ritters in Kyiv. Thanks to you both.